What's up, legends, and welcome back to another Redemption Row First Impressions video, because as you can see on my shelf right there, I finally have the Unmatched Marvel Redemption Row set in my hands. It's been so long, it should have been here 9 months ago, but you know what? Global shipping crisis, we can't control that, and we're just glad to finally have the sets available for order from Restoration Games, and I have it, so we're going to talk about it. These are my first impressions of Moon Knight. I made different videos for Luke Cage and Ghost Rider because people in my community wanted shorter, more digestible videos instead of one big, long first impressions video like with what I did for Battle of Legends Volume 2. So go check out the other two videos after this one. I talk about the map for the set and my thoughts on the new item mechanic in the Ghost Rider video. So if you want to hear about that, go check out that video after this one. This video we're talking about Moon Knight and my first impressions of the character. Spoiler alert, I know nothing about this character lore-wise, so it doesn't really make sense to me. He's just like Alex, except crazier. I said Alice, not Alex. I have a friend named Alex. He's also crazy, but we're not talking about him today. We're talking about Moon Knight. As a reminder, these are my first impressions. I do not have a lot of plays with this character, like 4 or 5 maybe, and that's just not enough to fully grasp the strategical depth that this character has, especially because there's a lot. He has 3 hero cards. That's 3 times more than any other hero, and I just haven't gotten a lot of time with this character, a lot of plays in. No one in the community has. There's just not a lot of data in terms of matchups or anything, so we have no idea how good he'll be, and this is just me imagining how good he'll be just based on that small sample size I have. So basically what I'm trying to say is these are my first impressions. It's probably wrong. Take it with a grain of salt. We're just here to have a discussion about this character because he's new, and it's fun talking about new characters and theorizing how good they'll be in the meta and stuff. So I would love it if you watch the video, listen to what I have to say, and leave a comment so we can talk about what I was right about, what I was wrong about, how good you'll think Moon Knight will be in the meta, who you think he'll be really good against. Does he crush Bigfoot? Does he lose hard to Sherlock? Things like that. It'll just be fun, and I love talking to people about this game, and there really isn't a better way to understand new characters than to just talk about them because no one really knows what's going on. It's all just fun and games and guessing. This has been a really long and random intro. I hope you're still watching. Let's talk about Moon Knight's stats and abilities. He is a melee fighter with 16 health and move 3. I think he deserves to be move 3. It makes him a lot more mobile and better, and it just it works. If he was move 2 while also being melee, that might be a little rough. And notice though, all 3 just characters that he is have the same stat line. They share the same health pool, so there's just one dial and they have 16 health. You start the game as Moon Knight. That's in the rules somewhere. At the start of your turn as Moon Knight, you can move up to 2 spaces, so you kind of get like a free mini maneuver. This will be really useful against characters that want to skirmish you or that are move 2 and melee themselves, because if you maneuver in and attack them and they attack you and maneuver away, they'll still be within range of you, and you can use your little Moon Knight hop at the start of your turn, just move 2 spaces right back next to them, and you can double attack them if you want to. It's also nice because it essentially means if you maneuver first action on your turn, you have a 5 space maneuver, 5, because you can move 2 spaces with the hop and then 3 spaces with the first action maneuver, and you just move 5 spaces if you wanted to. That makes Moon Knight, this Moon Knight, not this Moon Knight, one of the most mobile characters in the game, I think. Just having free movement, it's like Robin Hood or Bruce Lee, except instead of after combat or at the end of your turn, it's at the start of your turn, and you can move 2 spaces. I think this character wants to be aggressive, and this helps him do that. Before we talk about anything else, let's talk about the card back, because someone in my comments was like, hey, psst, talk about the card backs. So we're doing that. This is for you. I don't remember your username. I'm sorry. You can see all 3 identities are on this card. You got Moon Knight on the top. You got Konshu, I think, on the bottom. He's like the Egyptian god one. like I said, I know nothing about Moon Knight. And then I think that's Mr. Knight in the middle, and there's a nice little crescent moon that they're shrouded in. A lot of whites and blacks in this this card art. It's pretty cool. It's pretty spooky. Good card back, I'd say. And then the important thing is at the end of your turn, you change to your next identity, Konshu. And that's for all of these heroes. You basically go from Moon Knight. At the end of your turn, you go to Konshu. Then as Konshu, you go to Mr. Knight. And then as Mr. Knight, you go back to Moon Knight. So basically, there's like a 3-turn cycle. And you change at the end of each of your turns. So unlike Alice and Jekyll, well, I guess as Jekyll, you choose whether or not to switch at the start of your turn. And Alice has card effects that let her switch, whereas you just have like a consistent, at the end of your turn, you switch. And you have a couple cards that can change that, but for you and your opponent, there's going to be like a rhythm to play, as you'll see with the next two kind of a little bit more impactful identities that have abilities. There's like a rhythm. There's an ebb and a flow in how you play and how your opponent has to adjust based on what your abilities are. Let's talk about Konshu, because that'll really come to... You'll say, oh, I get that now. Konshu adds +2 to the value of all his attack cards. So this is kind of like Big Alice or Angry Achilles. You hit hard when you're Konshu, so your opponent is probably going to want to run away from you. He does not take damage from effects other than combat damage. This means that scheme damage, like Invisible Man's Reign of Terror or Step Lightly, just won't damage Konshu. It also means that card effects like Little Red's Once Upon a Time won't damage Konshu. So you are basically immune to auto damage and fatigue damage. That was confirmed by one of the designers, and that's really cool. It means you are very hard to damage without using combat or like big values, like just big attacks like Larger Than Life or Excalibur and Ancient Heirloom, things like that. You just won't take damage from things that aren't big numbers on combat cards. And things like Dracula's ability won't affect you, and that actually prevents Drac from drawing a card, which is kind of cool. So Konshu, pretty good. At the end of your turn, you go to Mr. Knight, who's basically Small Alice. Mr. Knight adds +1 to all his defense value. So basically, you go from hard to damage with schemes and auto damage and things of that nature to hard to damage with card values. So overall, this is looking like a pretty good kit. You basically get a turn of moving pretty far, a turn of hitting hard and being kind of indestructible, and then a turn of being really defensive. And it cycles through. So your opponent is probably going to want to hit you when you're Moon Knight. And I think Moon Knight is probably the worst of the three, just because the values that Konshu and Mr. Knight add to your cards is pretty substantial, because we've seen that Alice, especially if she's able to just be big all game, is really good, except you can't be Konshu all game because at the end of your turn you have to change. So there'll be a little bit of inconsistency, and being able to line up when you are the right form for what cards you have in your hand will be very important for Moon Knight. So let's talk about some of those cards. The first one is I'm Not Real. It is a 4-value attack, and of course all your cards are any. There are no like identity specific cards, so you can use any card at any time, and they all have different interactions for which identity you are, which is actually very cool. And it just means the strategy guide for Moon Knight is going to be like 4 hours long. So I'm Not Real. It's a 4-value attack. Pretty good. After combat, you may change to your next identity. That's interesting because you'll change after combat, and then at the end of your turn, you'll change again. So basically, if you're Moon Knight and you attack with this, you switch to Konshu. Then at the end of your turn, you switch to Mr. Knight. So it kind of skips a form, if you will. But also, like, you could use this first action as Moon Knight attack, and then your Konshu for the second attack. So you still get like a little bit of value from being that identity for like half a turn. So you can use this as Konshu to be big, you hit with a 6 value attack, switch to Mr. Knight, and then at the end of your turn, you're Moon Knight. And then it's only one turn before you're Konshu again, so I could see that being really aggressive. You can also use it as Mr. Knight to attack, you switch to Moon Knight, and then at the end of your turn, you switch to Konshu. So now you went from like a defensive stand to being able to hit big again next turn. And Moon Knight, you can use it to switch to Konshu, maybe get another attack in, and then you switch to Mr. Knight. So you kind of go from being like mobile to maybe use your ability, move 2 spaces, maneuver, charge in, slap them with this, and then you're Mr. Knight, and you will be a little bit more able to block. So there's just like a ton of scenarios to use this card in, and that's really cool. The next card is That's Why I Always Win. Let's pretend I didn't draw this card yet. There are 3 copies of this card, and it's the only other way besides your ability to change your identity. So I think this actually will be a very important card, and timing it will be very important for winning a game. The next card is That's Why I Always Win. It's basically Medusa's second shot. It's a 3 value attack, and you can boost it during combat. You have a lot of 2 value cards in your deck, and you have some 3s. So that means that you can hit with a 6 or a 5 as Moon Knight or Mr. Knight, and you can hit with an 8 or a 7 as Konshu. That's pretty good. The next card is That's the Part I Like. So it's a 3 value versatile. After combat, if you won the combat and you have a character that this could be a 5 value attack with or a 4 value block with, keep that in mind. If you won the combat, you may look at the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck and discard one of them. Place the other 2 back in any order. So you're going to want to guarantee that you win the combat with this card, because this effect is obviously busted. So you're probably not going to ever play this as Moon Knight, and probably 75% of the time you're playing this as Konshu as a 5 value attack, since most characters won't be able to block that, and they'll probably end up feinting it, and you still deal 3 damage over a feint when you're big. I could see you playing this as a 4 in some matchups, but you really have to know your opponent's deck and what they're going to hit you with, and really try to guarantee the effect. I think this is worse than like an insight effect where you look at your opponent's hand and discard a card, but just because that hand knowledge I think is better than just knowing what the next 2 cards your opponent is going to draw. But this does give you a chance to yeet a card from your opponent before they even have a chance to play it, because they haven't drawn it yet, which could be very nice. I guess it also helps that you know like 2 of the options that are coming up into their hand. But like if you play this win the combat, you yeet the best of the 3 cards that you saw, they double maneuver on their turn. It's just like partial hand knowledge. So I guess it's like, it's not horrible. It's a great effect, don't get me wrong. Just I don't think it's as good as like Insight or Eliminate the Impossible is. Still, stellar card. It's good you only have 2 copies of this, because if you had 3, you'd be a problem. The next card is A Totally Sane Thing to Do, a 2 value versatile. It says after combat you may deal 2 damage to both fighters in the combat. So it's kind of like Pat's card Battle Frenzy, except this is optional, and I don't think Battle Frenzy is. So this is either a kind of weak attack that you're using for the effect as Moon Knight. It's a 4 value attack that doesn't damage you as Konshu, because you don't take damage from effects other than combat damage. So this is an effect, so it wouldn't hurt you. You can use it as a 4 value attack and deal 2 damage to them on top of any combat damage you deal, or you can use it as a block. 2 value blocks aren't really that good, but it's kind of like Yanaga's Point Blank, where you deal 2 damage back to the enemy because you won't take the 2 damage. And this even works without adjacency, so it works against range fighters. Or you can use it as a 3 value block as Mr. Knight, and you still deal the 2 damage. I think you want to be aggressive as Moon Knight, and I think you want to get an early lead. And when you have an early lead in health, say you have 13 health and your opponent has 8, you can afford to deal 2 damage to both fighters and just eat the damage if you're Moon Knight or Mr. Knight. So I think this helps you be aggressive, but it's not a good card if you are below, or I should say behind on life. Because even if you're using it as Konshu, when you're behind, let's say you have 8 life and they have 13, sure, you bring them down to 11, but that either means you played a bad card to block with, or you wasted a big Alice attack opportunity when you could have played something like this, or this, or this. So interesting card. Figuring out when to use it will be really paramount to Moon Knight's strategy. And I will say, Moon Knight's strategy, that's something I'm still trying to figure out. This deck feels very all over the place. I don't want to say like inconsistent, because you do have like a good amount of draw, and you only have like, I think, 12 or 13 unique cards. You have 12, which is on the low side. That's really good. It's just the timing of your identities and which cards you have in your hand really like restrict you to what you're able to do. And if you just don't have the right combinations of things line up, that is not that's not good. And I think you lose pretty quickly if you don't have the things you want to do line up, and you're forced to play this like as Mr. Knight when you're behind on health. And I guess this is the May, so like you don't have to take the damage. So I guess if you're behind, you don't take the damage. You don't deal any damage, which I guess just means you played a 3-value block, a 2-value block, or a 2-value attack, which just like isn't that great. What I'm saying is, I think this character is going to be very hard to play. The next card is Good Enough for Us. Another very interesting card with a cool decision. It's a 4-value versatile, which means it's a 6-value attack as Konshu, or a 5-value block as Mr. Knight. It says after combat, you may draw 2 cards. If you do, take 2 damage. So it's looking, I think, best as Konshu, because you can play a 6-value attack that draws 2 after combat. So it's kind of like Ghost Rider's 5 that you can spend a Hellfire and draw 2 cards. It's just like a good big value card that replenishes your hand. It doesn't put you at a hand disadvantage or anything like that. That's pretty good, and especially when you don't have to take damage from the effect as Konshu. You can play it on defense as Konshu too, and it's a 4-value block, which is a great value to block with, and draw 2 cards after combat. That means if you're blocking as Konshu, that means you switched from Moon Knight at the end of your turn to Konshu, and if your opponent's attacking you, you're going to get a chance to attack them back as Konshu, which means having extra cards in your hand is very good. It could be a 5-value block as Mr. Knight, and again, I guess it's optional. It's like this card, you don't have to take the self-damage, but I guess as Konshu, you do, because you get the reward without any of the penalty. Very cool card. The next one is We're All in This Together. It's a 3-value block, which is just like a solid value, I guess, for Moon Knight and Konshu. It's a 4-value block for Mr. Knight, and it says if you won the combat, draw a card. Really cool art on this one. So you generally don't win defensive combats with block values of 3, but at a 4, I think you win at least a third of the time, matchup dependent, of course. So a 4-value block card that draws you a card after combat is kind of like an exploit from Sinbad and Dracula's deck, and that's just like a very solid card. I think Moon Knight wants to be aggressive. I've said that like twice already, and having the ability to draw cards helps him fuel that aggression. If you're Mr. Knight, I guess you draw a card and then you take a turn as Mr. Knight. So it's kind of like you're like 2 turns away from being Konshu. So it's a nice like setup tool, I guess. The next card is Madness Will Keep You Alive. Sorry, let's reorganize a little bit here. It's one of your 2 schemes. Recover 2 health. So it's like Baptism of Blood, just a scheme that recovers 2 health and does something else. It's just solid, I guess. If you started your turn in a different space, gain 1 action. So it's kind of like a momentous shift trigger, where you could play this for a scheme that just heals you 2 if you haven't moved this turn. And I guess you're doing that because it's a pass. That like really isn't that good by itself, but being able to maneuver, move, heal 2 for free, and then do something else, I guess, as good. And you'll see this has a boost value of 3, which matters for a card we're going to talk about in a little bit. This also has synergy with Moon Knight's ability because you can just use it, move 2 spaces, and then play this for free without even having to maneuver. Overall, you have 2 copies of this, so you can heal 4, so you effectively have 20 health. That kind of helps turn the tide of the game into your favor, because like I said, you want to be aggressive, which often will leave you vulnerable to getting counterattacked, especially if you're not Mr. Knight or not Konshu, depending on if your opponent has like scheme damage or things like that. So being able to recover health while still like not having to use an action to do that is really good for your game plan, especially because the boost value, we'll talk about that in a second. The other scheme in your deck is Travelers of the Night. Move your fighter up to 4 spaces. They may move through opposing fighters, gain 1 action. This is really good because let's say if you use it as Moon Knight, you can move 2 spaces at the start of your turn, then use this and move 4 spaces through opposing fighters, and you just moved 6 spaces out of nowhere. You moved through your enemy's defensive line of sidekicks, and now you're right next to their hero with 2 actions. And you can set up some degenerate things with this, like hitting them with I'm Not Real, switching to Konshu, and then hitting them again with something huge that they weren't even expecting you to be able to do. This is really good. This helps you get double attacks in, especially as Konshu, because you can just use it first action as Konshu, and then it gives you an action, so you still have 2 actions left to hit someone with. The problem that Big Alice and Achilles have is that, sure, they have +2 on their attacks, but often when they're in that form, their opponent is kiting them in a way that makes them have to maneuver first action, so they only get 1 attack in with their big attack buff. Whereas this can let you do some big damage with multiple attacks because it gives you an action. I probably wouldn't use this as Mr. Knight. And the next card is Past and Present Intermingle. Oh boy. It's a 2-value versatile. It says during combat, add the boost value of the top card of your discard pile to this card's value. So now you see why these schemes giving you actions is so good, because they each have a boost value of 3. They're the only cards in your deck that have a boost value of 3. So let's say you're Big Konshu. There's no little Konshu, it's just Konshu. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, by the way. You play Travelers of the Night first action. You move through the Harpy, you're right next to Medusa, and you play this, which has the +2 bonus from Konshu, and it has +3 from this, and you're hitting Medusa for 7. And if she faints it, she still takes 2. That's just really, really good. It is a little bit telegraphed based on the top card of your discard pile, like especially these schemes kind of telegraph that a little bit, but I guess you could also play this with a 2 and feel fine about it being a 6. It's also a 3 plus whatever the boost is when you're Mr. Knight, so could be a 6 on defense or a 5 on defense, which is still really solid. And you have 3 copies of this, so you could line it up with 3 different schemes, and that'd be really nice. And worst case scenario, you hit a 2 and it's a 6 or a 5, which that still is not horrible. This is a really solid card in it, but it adds to the problem where your timing has to be like spot on as Moon Knight, otherwise you kind of have some difficulty getting things done. And if you just don't see your schemes in combination with this card, you could be playing it a little bit suboptimally. The next card is Fist of Konshu. It's a 3-value versatile. It says after combat, if you won the combat, move the opposing fighter up to 4 spaces. So it's a 3-value versatile with a combat dependent effect trigger, kind of like this card. So basically, if you're Konshu and you're hitting it with a 5 as an attack, probably going to win. And against certain decks, when you're small, you're Mr. Knight and it's a 4, you might also win too. I think this will be really good as Mr. Knight against ranged fighters, because then you can move the opposing fighter, and you can't move yourself with this card. It's only the opposing fighter up to 4 spaces. So if your opponent attacks you from range, you can win the combat, because usually ranged fighters have lower value attacks. You can pull them in close and hit them, except you won't be big, you'll be Mr. Knight. So the utility of this card I think is a little bit underwhelming, just because if you're Konshu, you don't want to hit with a 5, you want to hit with a 6, an 8, or a 7, because you can use your schemes as boost fodder in this and make it an 8 as Konshu. And I guess it's just like a mediocre card that every deck has to have that like you might find a good use for, but I think a lot of times on defense as as Moon Knight and Konshu, it like won't win the combat. You don't really want to attack with it as Konshu because you don't want to waste up like that opportunity to use something bigger on just like a 5 that moves the opposing fighter that you'll be adjacent to if you're attacking. Although I guess like a Toil and Danger, let's say you attack Sinbad and he plays Toil and Danger, he'll move, and then you being the attacker, you'll resolve second, so you I guess could move him after that. It could prevent people from running away from you first action, but if they were going to run away from you, why wouldn't you just hit them with something harder to begin with, I guess? I don't know. I kind of don't like this card, but I'm not saying it's not without its use, because being able to move an opposing fighter 4 spaces, that's a lot, especially on certain maps like Raptor Paddock or Baskerville or any of the Marvel maps with items or Hanging Gardens. Things with map features will be useful to mess with your opponent with this card. The next card is Let Your Insanity Guide You, and you'd have to be insane to think this card is good. It's a 1 value versatile, so it's a 2 on defense as Mr. Knight, or a 3 on it with an attack from Konshu. It says after combat, discard the top card of your deck, draw cards equal to that card's boost value. This is worse than regroup in almost every way. Basically, if you discard a 1, you draw 1 card, but you're also like losing a card from your deck. That's bad. You discard a 2, you draw 2 cards. I guess it's kind of like you won the regroup, but you still lost a card. And if you discard a scheme, well, your schemes are really, really good, so that just sucks. And then you draw 3 cards, so you're 4 cards down. I think Moon Knight wants to be aggressive. That's like the 4th time I've said it, and you want to draw cards. But this is like too much. Also because you're just losing a card without the chance to play it, and the fact that it's random means sometimes when you want to draw cards, you won't, and sometimes when you don't want to draw a lot of cards, you will. And you might lose one of your best cards in your deck just randomly. I think this card is really, really bad, but that's okay because you have some good cards in your deck, so every deck needs to have some bad cards so that it balances out, like Regroup or Feeding Frenzy. And you only have 2 copies of this, so it's not like you have 3 copies clocking up your deck. And your last card is Faint. It's your only basic card, and you have 3 copies of it, so you have the standard cancellation abilities of any character. So overall, this deck is cool. It's like a puzzle trying to figure out when to play what cards when, how to maximize the effect of them based on what hero you are and what ability you have and what you can do. And trying to play optimally, I think, will be not impossible, but very challenging. So I think if you put in a lot of work to master this character and a lot of dedication to learning how to like play in that flow state where your cards keep lining up and you keep getting the effects, kind of like Little Red, I think will pay off very well. Any character with the ability that basically like Alice has, where you can hit for big and also block for big, I guess, has a chance of being meta just because you can abuse characters with poor value blocking. The problem is you're even more inconsistent than Alice, and you're more predictable because you're on like a set timer where at the end of it, your turn, you change every turn like clockwork. And opponents can probably play around that to a good degree. I think it's better that you change at the end of your turn than the start of your turn, because that means like when you attack and you're big as Konshu and you go into small mode on your opponent's turn, I like that. I like that, I guess, transition. And I would say Moon Knight is probably the worst just because like you don't get any bonus on offense or defense. So a lot of times like I don't even bother trying to attack people with Moon Knight just because I'd rather just wait a turn and do that as Konshu. And I guess Moon Knight is more of like a reload your hand after taking a beating and hope to deal the beating back, and you can move 2 spaces for free, which is nice, because then you can like position yourself better on the board. It gives you like 8 spaces of movement if you're just double maneuvering on your turn. That's pretty good. So overall, I probably won't be playing this character in competitive, but they are so fun. I've had so much fun playing Moon Knight in the casual games that I've played him in, just because I like characters like this that are puzzles where you have to really think about the order of cards you're playing, like Little Red and Bruce Lee. He kind of feels like a combo character, even if he doesn't really gain that many actions. So I'll be interested in seeing what Moon Knight fans like Tommy Elliott or Pomadepin can do with this character after they've grinded out his matchups for a couple months. But I'm probably going to let those people do it and just behold the wonder they can achieve instead of trying to do it myself. So overall, I really like this character. Do I think he's going to be meta? Probably not, just due to the inconsistencies, but you can't really ever count out a character that can hit for an extra +2 and doesn't take damage from combat effects or fatigue. So who knows? Although I think this character isn't designed to go to fatigue because he draws a lot of cards, and I think he needs to because he wants to be aggressive. Ooh, if you've been taking shots every time I've said that, I am so sorry. So please, in the comments, let me know what you think of the character and my thoughts, because I'm probably wrong, and I just would love to hear from you, my audience, what you guys think of this character. I think they're really cool. Like I said, let me know what you think. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this more short form first impressions video instead of having to sit through an hour and a half, 2 hours. Hopefully I'm giving the people what they want. And thanks for watching. So as always, like, subscribe, and yeet!